Um, what, what, what? What is all this? Why? Hey, how's it going, guys? Today I wanted to do a hopefully quick video on my experience leaving Windows. This was prompted by Microsoft continuing to throw random bits of software that I don't want onto my computer without my knowledge. For example, when Copilot first came out, I removed every trace of that I could find, including through registry tweaks and all that as well. Fast forward, I think a little over a year, and it's back. It's back. I don't know what happened. What's going on? I also have automatic updates completely disabled. I actually have to manually install updates, which might be a bad thing, but in my opinion, with Microsoft being the way it is honestly kind of a good thing as well. But yeah, I think this behavior is kind of crazy, especially when they're doing it to the customers that have actually paid for a Windows license. I have paid for a Windows license, and I think I should have the freedom to choose, right? But instead, Microsoft keeps throwing these things at me. I disable them, and they're like, here, you didn't update your PC? It's still back. I don't know how, but it's back. That leads me into Linux. And before anyone says Mac OS, I'm unfortunately not a big Mac person. I understand its perks and stuff, but it's just not for me. So I decided to try out Linux. When it comes to Linux, you first have to choose a distro. A lot of people suggest things like Pop OS or Linux Mint, and I've tried those before, like a long time ago before Proton was a thing, and I wasn't really a fan of it, so I wanted to try something different. I ended up going with Arch Linux, and it is a bit more intimidating than things like Linux Mint or even some of the Arch-based distributions, but Arch Linux isn't as scary as people make it out to be, in my opinion. The Arch install script makes installing Arch super simple, and it even includes a lot of options that don't exist on other Arch-based distros with a GUI-based installer. For example, being able to have home on a separate partition with Arch installed, you can just check a box and it'll do it for you, and it is magical. I love that. Now, Arch Linux has been very fun to use. I've learned a lot about Linux and Arch in general, and every day is kind of a learning opportunity, which I frankly need. If I don't get, the bad thoughts creep in, the demons creep in, you know? Moving on from vanilla Arch, though, I ended up switching over to CachyOS, which is an Arch-based distribution, so everything that I learned before pretty much still applies here. I wanted to switch over because I was having some issues with games in vanilla Arch, and CachyOS is kind of known for being a gaming-focused distribution or kind of bleeding-edge distribution, so I decided to give it a try, and that's where we're at now. So this is my Linux setup. I'm running CachyOS with KDE as my desktop environment. I was previously using Hyprland, but that had its issues with gaming that I didn't really want to deal with. It felt really rough to go through. But on my current setup, you can kind of see that I have an 86 theme going on. I really like this wallpaper because it's pretty low key, right? Like if you have a quick look at it, you might not even realize that it's an anime, a piece of anime art. And also the colors are really desaturated. I really like that because it doesn't stand out a ton. Here's a quick look at the terminal I use. I use Kitty. I really like Kitty because it's very simple to customize and have it look amazing. So this is my current setup for this. I may change the theming in a little bit. I'm not 100% set on this just yet, but I really like how this looks. You can see here I have the Laughing Fox insignia, also from 86, and no title bar. And this is one of the few exceptions that I've made where I have some transparency and blur effects going on. I think the terminal looks amazing. It's one of the things that I think you can really get looking good because usually the background of it is just one flat color. So may as well put in a little bit of magic and make it look pretty. Most things outside of the terminal though are pretty simple. For example, here's my Dolphin, my file manager. I prefer Dolphin, and it's very, very simple. It basically just looks like a dark mode aesthetic, which it kind of is. But I wanted to keep things super simple for the vast majority of programs because I didn't want to eat away at my GPU usage. Having a lot of blur effects and transparency can eat into that. So I want to keep that as little as possible with a few exceptions so that I can keep my games running good. I'm going to skip over some things here and get into kind of the negative side of using Linux, and in this case, Arch Linux. A big hurdle when it comes to using Linux is installing software and getting it to work the way you expect it to. So here we're going to go through the example of OBS in Arch Linux. This will apply to any Arch-based distro as well. So EndeavourOS, CachyOS, which is what I'm using here. Of course, Vanilla Arch, and stuff like Nyarch, I guess, if that's what you're into. And of course, there are other Arch-based distros as well. So on the Arch Linux wiki, we have 3 different packages listed. We have OBS Studio, OBS Studio Browser, OBS Studio Titan 652. Now, just about a week ago from when this is being recorded, they didn't actually have these explanations, so it was pretty difficult to understand the differences between these. But here we actually have a quick blurb explaining what these are. I would highly recommend against using OBS Studio package from the Arch repository, the official Arch repository. The reason being is that certain features just aren't available on it. For one, custom browser docs aren't available on it from what I experienced. And that's going to be pretty important because with OBS on at least Arch Linux, it doesn't have integrations with Twitch or YouTube. So you don't get the option to log into your Twitch account, and you don't get those chat docs and the stream info docs added automatically. You'll need to add it the old school way, which is manually through a URL. So we need that option available to us. I went with OBS Studio Titan 652. The reason being for this is because relative to the other packages, it's pretty feature rich and it has most of what you would expect out of OBS. It just needs a little bit of work. So if you have a baseline understanding of Arch Linux, you may be tempted to open up your terminal and go sudo pacman s OBS Studio Titan 652, type in your password, and target not found. So if you aren't familiar with this, this is because this package lives on the AUR, or the Arch user repository. These are packages maintained by the community, and so they won't show up on the official Arch repository. So how do we go about installing this? So if we click on this link, it'll take us to the AUR, and you can do a git clone change directory and make package, which works for many, many different packages. And you would use this link, or you could pull it from the actual GitHub. But if you are planning to install a bunch of things from the AUR, or honestly, even if you're planning to just install this, I would still suggest getting it. I would install an AUR helper. So what is an AUR helper? It is basically a one command thing that will simplify installing things from the AUR. Now, very kindly, the creator of Yay has included a list of commands needed for this, which you can just find by scrolling down, and you just copy paste this into your terminal. But you can also find this stuff on their GitHub. So if we scroll down, you can find it here as well. So once you have Yay installed, what you would do to install OBS Studio Titan 652 would be yay-s OBS Studio Titan 652. One thing you might notice is that when you do open up OBS is that you're missing those custom browser docs. So how we're going to get those back is we're going to go to our root directory, user, share, applications, and we're going to look for com.obsproject.studio.desktop. These kind of work similarly to shortcuts on Windows. For simplicity's sake, that's all I'm going to say about it. We're going to click on it, copy it, and we're going to put it into a different directory. And we're going to go back home, and we're going to want to unhide any folders. Most cases, that's going to be Control H to do that. And we're going to put this in .local, share, applications. So this is where we're going to put our user-defined desktop entries. Anytime you use the quote-unquote start menu or a launcher, it's going to pull from this directory first because this is user-defined stuff. We're going to make a modification here by right-clicking this, Properties, and under Application, we're going to insert this bit here. Now we have custom browser docs available.
Another thing you might find is that you might not have any game capture available to you. So how will we add that? That's where this package comes in, OBS capture.
Aside from the caveat of Linux where some applications will need some additional work to get working, I also want to talk about DaVinci Resolve because the way it works on Linux is a little unfortunate. So, for example, on Windows, you can use H.264, H.265 video pretty much just fine on Windows, on the free version of DaVinci Resolve. That's what I've been using, and it works great. And H.264 is pretty common. I would say it's the bona fide standard. Now we scroll down to Linux here, and we have some raw formats and whatnot. But we get down to H.264, H.265, and for Linux, we'll see here Studio only, which is the paid version of DaVinci Resolve, which from my recollection is not cheap. So for someone who doesn't use the program to make any kind of money, it's just kind of like, whoa. So can't use H.264, H.265. You can use AV1, but missing out on these two is a bit of a big deal, especially if you record footage on your phone. For example, I have a Galaxy S23 and that only records video in H.264 and H.265. You can get around it, of course, by converting that video to a different format. But if you do a lot of recording this way, it becomes a whole extra step and a whole extra kind of pain, right? Of course, there are alternative options in terms of editing programs. But if you are used to working with DaVinci Resolve, something to think about. And of course, I have to talk about gaming. So for the most part, if you're playing non-competitive, non-PvP games, the vast majority of them work pretty well. Counter-Strike 2 is a bit of an exception because it is made by Valve. And Valve is pushing for Linux, so this runs well as well. DG Max Respect, not a game I expected to run because it does have anti-cheat, but it does work. Very happy about that. But games like Rainbow Six Siege. I love Siege, but I cannot play it on Linux. Skate period, skate dot, I don't know what EA really wants us to call it. But this game, as is, not competitive, not PvP, not gonna run on Linux as far as I'm aware. Battlefield 6, PvP, somewhat competitive, you could argue. No Linux support planned. And especially with the direction that gaming's going with these kernel-level anti-cheats, I'm, as of right now, not super optimistic in terms of competitive gaming on Linux. That really makes me sad because I'm still having to dual boot into Windows for these specific things. But that's just the state of things right now. So why do I like Linux? I'm going to keep this section short because I'm going to talk about points that pretty much everyone talks about when they're talking about the pros of Linux. But the first thing for me is customization. So when it comes to programs or packages, you can add or remove them as you wish. For the most part, some distros are more restrictive than others, and you could potentially end up breaking your system, but honestly, that's kind of a rite of passage for Linux users. For example, with CachyOS, it came with WebCord already installed, but I could remove that and replace it with the official Discord client because that's what I prefer with some small tweaks here and there. This is important to me because I don't like having so much bloat on my computer. I really just want to keep programs that I'm going to use, where Windows tends to throw stuff at you that you'll never use. Besides that, there's the eye candy side of things. So, pretty much anything you can imagine, you can probably create with the right know how and skills. But even for someone like myself who doesn't know a lot about coding and things like that, with certain desktop environments, customization becomes extremely simple with some very user friendly interfaces. So, KDE, for example, I think is very user friendly and very easy to customize to get looking well. Sometimes things have some weird behaviors, but you can get things working with just a little bit of elbow grease. Outside of that, there's the learning experience that I went through. So, when I first started using Linux, I had no idea what I was doing. But with a lot of searching of forums and YouTube videos, I was able to get things going in a way that I liked. I experimented with things like KDE, Hyprland, and various Arch based distributions, and I was able to get things working the way I wanted to. But this was a huge hurdle for me, and I learned a lot about how things work on Linux. Even though I daily an Arch based distro, I also managed to learn quite a bit about Debian based systems as well. And this has been very helpful to me because I've been getting into home labbing, having my own NASs or servers available to me, and I'm not going to install Windows Server or something like that on those computers. Chances are I'm going to use some Linux based distro. So for my first server, which is still a bit of a work in progress, I'm running ZimaOS, which is kind of like baby's first NAS because it is very user friendly, but it is also a little bit limiting. However, I still managed to learn a ton from it. So, for example, I was able to set up Nextcloud, which is kind of like a Google Drive alternative. And I also managed to set up Nginx so that service is available outside of my home network. This is going to be really awesome for when family goes on trips so they can just upload their pics to there and not have to worry about running out of phone storage. There's also the huge perk of Linux that most distros are going to be free. There are a few exceptions to this, but the vast majority of them are free, and if you want to give it a try, you can just do that. If you want to switch distros, you can try out another one. So there are options out there, and there is very little downsides to going ahead and trying out something different. All this talk about my Linux experience, of course, leads into the big question, will I be sticking with Linux? Unfortunately, I'm probably not going to completely replace Windows with Linux, but I am going to keep a Linux partition and try to use that as much as I can. The big things that are preventing me from switching to Linux full time are things like game support. So, things like Battlefield 6, which I've been playing a lot of lately, that I cannot play on Linux. Also, program support. DaVinci Resolve on Windows is just straight up better than on Linux, at least the free version, and also things like Photoshop. Yes, I know Adobe Big Evil Corpo, but it's a program that I've been using for nearly 20 years now. And if I'm trying to, say, build up my portfolio or something like that, I'd rather be focused on creating rather than just learning how to do the basics again. That said, I did still really enjoy my time with Linux. I really appreciate things like how lightweight Linux tends to be, and it just leads to a very snappy, quick experience. And also things like global keybinds or hotkeys. So if there's anything that you find lacking in the keybinds, you can just change it yourself. So for example, I have a toggle mic mute keybind, and that I think is really awesome, especially if you're using like a USB mic or a more professional level audio interface, something that doesn't have a mic mute functionality built into it, you can use software for that. It's not as good as like a hardware level thing, but I think having it there is better than having nothing at all. So that's really awesome. Anyways, that's going to be it for my Linux experience. As always, if you have any questions about anything that I've mentioned in this video, just let me know down in the comments below, and I'll try to get back to you as soon as possible. That said, I do also want to mention I'm still very new to Linux, like I've been using it for a few months, And while I feel like I have a decent amount of know-how, I'm still probably not going to be the best person to talk to about this stuff, especially when it comes to like troubleshooting and coding, stuff like that. I'm not the best person to ask, but I will still continue learning from Linux. I will still try to use Linux here and there, and I'm also going to be trying to really start building out a home lab. But yeah, that's going to be it for this video. Thanks for watching, and goodbye. I'm waving, but you can't see it. Bye!